We live in a world of jerks. There are ill-will people pretty much everywhere you look. In your class, in your family, in your neighborhood, random people on the street, and probably even you yourself sometimes fall into this category of insulters. That's why even the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius would start off his day by reminding himself of the negative types of people he would have to deal with. He would use negative visualization as a Stoic practice to prepare himself for the uncontrollable outside world.
You know who else knows a lot about Stoicism? Einzelgänger.
Einzelgänger is a YouTuber from the Netherlands who creates philosophical content about Stoicism, Taoism, Buddhism, and more. I remember I stumbled across his channel when I first started looking for videos about the Stoic philosophy. I really enjoyed and still enjoy his videos because they're very informative and are presented in a very simple to understand fashion, and when in one of his videos he mentioned that he released a book, I ordered it online.
By the way, the link to it will be in the description.
Anyways, I read the book and I really liked it, so today I want to kind of review the book, give my own perspective, and go over what makes a person unoffendable. It's so easy to offend someone these days. Even the act of making this observation can rub a person up the wrong way. Although the internet has made it dramatically easier to trigger people, the inability to cope with mere spoken words isn't a new phenomenon. These introductory words, in my opinion, accurately describe the people nowadays. Thin-skinned, soft, and fragile. Of course, not everybody is like this, but more often than not, especially with the rise of social media, we are more concerned with the protection of our ego than ever before. We are obsessed with our own self-image and amplify it on social media for other strangers to compliment or insult us in order that we could feel good or bad about ourselves. We let others control our life, and when life is left to be controlled by the uncontrollable, it turns into chaos.
Probably the foundation of this book and the road to becoming unoffendable is the Stoic Approach.
One of the main Stoic ideas is the act of indifference towards the outside world. Stoics argue that we only control our minds, our decisions, and our perspectives of the world, but the world itself is uncontrollable and is in constant change. People and their opinions about us are not within our control, and no matter how much we try to convince, influence, or change somebody's mind, ultimately their opinion of us is left for them to control. That's why in times of verbal attacks, based on Seneca's teachings, Einzelgänger has come up with a flowchart of how to properly handle an insult. What I've been doing lately is practice this in my mind whenever somebody would attempt to attack my ego. Of course, it's easy to mask my immediate reaction to the insult, but I think that most of the time the insult doesn't necessarily attack our views about ourselves right away. Often it's the way we perceive and shape the insult in our minds using our imagination to make a bigger deal out of it than it really is. And that's why this flowchart is really helpful. It lets me have a sober conversation with myself and to deconstruct the insult in a proper way. Is it true? If not, it's nonsense, and why should we be triggered by nonsense? If yes, then it's not an insult, it's the truth. And then why be triggered by the truth? To add to the Stoic approach towards other people, their insults and views on you, we have to realize that there are two types of indifference. There's preferred indifference and dispreferred indifference. For example, when people don't like you or consider you a loner, weird, or socially awkward, it's a dispreferred indifference, as it's not nice to be treated that way, but since the situation is more controlled by the outside world and doesn't get into the way of pursuing virtues and doesn't affect your happiness and tranquility, it's not worth it to worry about. Same principle goes with preferred indifference. It's nice when you're liked by many people, as that would expose you to more opportunities, connections, and a better social standing. But does it necessarily lead to happiness or achieving a state of calmness of the mind? No, it's just something that is nice to have but shouldn't be pursued. The wise man, I say, self-sufficient though he be, said Seneca, and his statement describes the main idea of this book. Self-sufficiency comes from within and not from the outside world. So when we focus on our opinions about ourselves and not on other people's, we can become more self-sufficient, more indifferent to the uncontrollable, and less offendable. Chapter 1 of this book focuses on the types of insults there are, and the Einzelgänger's flowchart can help us to deal with any type of insult. But before we can do that, we must understand the insults themselves. By reading about different types of verbal attacks, I learned that the insult is not always meant to be an insult and that we make it out to be one. As Seneca said, we suffer more in imagination than in reality.
Sometimes people just want to talk with us and use insults as a way to start a conversation. But when the playful tease is not understood, people perceive it as an attack and become defensive.
So in general, there are two types of insults, intentional and not intentional, and both, depending on the situation, can be viewed as negative. I think that it doesn't matter if the insult is meant to be offensive or not, it's still in our control to be unmoved by it. It's important to differentiate an insult from a physical attack because only the physical one can harm us and the mental can be controlled. According to Seneca, we fail to endure an insult, which is just a formation of words and opinions aimed towards us without any real substance, and often prefer to endure physical pain more than insults. You will find slaves who prefer to be flogged to being slapped, and who think stripes and death more endurable than insulting words. Seneca.
Seneca believed that to be offended is a form of mental weakness. And where does this mental weakness come from? From the story we tell ourselves.
In this book, Einzelgänger talks a lot about ego, and he describes it as the story we tell ourselves. An insult can be born and consumed by somebody who is confirmed by the outside to have a trait, and he or she exists as that trait instead of just having it. So when somebody threatens your existence, you get an insult. For me, I had and still sometimes have a problem with my self-image. Ever since 2 years ago when my ex-girlfriend left me, I've been trying to become the best version of myself, and Stoicism played a big part in my self-development journey. So whenever somebody attacks my weakness or something that I'm trying to improve, it attacks my self-being, as I identified myself as somebody who is in constant improvement, and that leads me to think that in some situations I am above other people. For example, as you probably remember, at the start I talked about the controllable and the uncontrollable parts of life. Well, I don't want to be affected by the outside world, and I'm practicing self-sufficiency.
In my work, sometimes my coworkers playfully tease me about another girl that works there and say that I have a crush on her, which I don't. The tease itself doesn't really bother me, but when they say that, "Oh, don't deny it," or "Look at you, you're blushing," it sometimes gets on my nerves that they think that I am disturbed by this tease, which I am not, but ironically, I am at the same time when they describe my reaction to it. And the biggest problem is that this is just a friendly tease and not an insult at all.
The story I tell myself is that I am a Stoic who is not affected by the outside influences, and whenever this self-image is tampered with, it quickly falls apart and the story of me being a true Stoic crumbles. To be a self-sufficient Stoic is something I strive for, but in order for me to get to be one, I have to let go of the ego as much as possible, as the ego often inflates when we are complimented, or it shrinks when we are insulted, and the state of it most of the time is in the hands of the outside world. There's also a much darker side of our self-image, and this time it's a story we don't want to tell ourselves. But in order to become unoffendable, we have to acknowledge it. In chapter 7 of Unoffendable, Einzelgänger touches upon shadow work and how by trying to understand the insulter and our past actions, we can feel compassion for him or her. The shadow rests in our subconscious and sometimes emerges and can do some damage to others. There's probably nobody in the world that hasn't made fun of somebody in some way or another. We are all capable of bullying somebody, and of course that doesn't mean we should, but to realize that we have a dark side can help us to prevent insulting others and become more resilient when we ourselves are insulted, because then we know how the process of attempting to offend someone goes.
When you made fun of somebody at some point of your life, you can probably think of the reasons of why you did it. Maybe you wanted to ridicule somebody else's physical weakness as a way to entertain a group of people that you wanted to be a part of, or maybe you just did it because you wanted to mask your own insecurities. Whatever the reason is, by going back to these events and analyzing them, you can better understand where the insulter is coming from and realize that he's just another human like you.
Marcus Aurelius, on his morning negative visualization sessions, meditated on the different types of negative people and in a way felt bad for the bullies because of their ignorance of what is good and evil. Also, by contemplating these past experiences where you made fun of somebody, you can learn to not do it in the future. As Einzelgänger puts it, lose the past, but don't lose the lesson. The point of this book is not to expect others to be less offensive, but to discover how to become unoffendable, or at least less offendable. But an unoffendable person is not just somebody who is unmoved by insults. It's somebody who isn't moved at all by any opinions about him or her. This person knows themselves and understands that no matter what anybody says about them, it's still the way they perceive themselves that is the final truth. Gary Vaynerchuk often talks about this, the act of not listening. He preaches that we shouldn't take compliments or insults too seriously and remember that the things people say about us are just their opinions and only we ourselves know the full story of our character.
Nothing makes me happier than when I read my comments where one post is, Gary V, you're just hot air, fuck you, right? And the next one's like, Gary, you're fucking Jesus, you walk on water. And I look at those two and I'm like, this is why I'm gonna win. I can't hear either of them.
On the other hand, it's important to sometimes take into the consideration constructive criticism and advice from people in order to grow as a person. But it's important to understand when to take criticism and learn, and when to disregard verbal attacks or praises. Even the compliments can be damaging as they inflate the ego, and when the ego is inflated, those compliments manifest into the reasons for our existence. Once this existence is threatened, the story we tell ourselves collapses. So to summarize, an unoffendable person is somebody who is self-sufficient and is fully in control of his mind and decision-making, regardless of the influences from the outside world. This person is in a healthy detachment from his ego and others, and can find balance between knowing when to take advice and constructive criticism in order to better themselves, and when to disregard nonsense of insults.
Is it possible to achieve this state of being completely unoffendable? Most likely not. We are all human and not robots, but we should aim for this ideal, because even if we don't reach this ideal, we'll still be the most unoffendable versions of ourselves that we can ever be. By doing this, we can accept the reality that the world is full of jerks, but at the same time, these jerks lose all purpose as they can't offend us. This way we deal with an unsolvable problem, not to expect others to act in a certain way because this is impossible, but to work on our minds and become more resilient and more unoffendable. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you found it helpful and informative, please leave a like and subscribe for more weekly self-improvement content. Also, check out Einzelgänger on YouTube and on his social medias, and of course there's going to be a link in the description to buy his book Unoffendable. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and if you want to support this channel, there's going to be links to both my PayPal and my Patreon in the description. Social medias are also in the description as well. Thank you again for watching this video, and stay on your journey.